Welcome to Fractional Frequency, our take on talent, people trends, and the reality of building up businesses in an economy that keeps rewriting the rules. I'm Amy Crook, founder of Stratavis.
And I'm Erin Totis, Managing Director of Talent Delivery, which basically means I live in the universe of finding the right people to make an impact for our clients fast.
Around here, we talk about the real side of HR and talent, what works, what absolutely doesn't, and how to build teams that can carry a business, not drag it down.
We'll break down trends, share the behind the scenes of scaling a consultancy from zero, and probably overshare a little because that's where the good lessons live.
So whether you're building, hiring, leading, or just trying to keep your company profitable, you're in the right place.
This is Fractional Frequency. Let's get to it. Amy, how are you?
I am great, and I'm very excited because tonight we have Joe Silva joining us for the podcast. And Joe is a high-level expert in cybersecurity with real-world experience in both the defense and private sectors. And now Joe has turned his talents towards entrepreneurship as the founder and CEO of Spektion, a cybersecurity software firm. And as a career-long fan of corporate HR, it was only natural that we would have him on to talk about all the value adds of HR. So welcome, Joe.
Hey, thanks for having me, Amy and Aaron. Appreciate it. Looking forward to this.
Good. Joe, do you remember the first time you and I met?
I believe so. I think I was railing about the lack of utility in TransUnion TA, but that's a wild guess, but a pretty good one because I railed about it often.
Yeah, it was definitely my most interesting meeting when I first started at TransUnion. You essentially let me know that you weren't quite sure why I was here because you did all the hiring for your own function anyway, and talent acquisition is essentially useless. And I burst out laughing because did not know what to say.
Well, that was when I thought I was going to have to pay you a commission on the hires I was making. And then when I found out that it was essentially free for me, my attitude changed.
Then it seemed like good value at the
Yes.
free price tag.
Yes.
So talk us through like what you've been up to since those TransUnion days.
Well, since my glorious tour of duty running cybersecurity at TransUnion, I moved over to JLL, the large global corporate commercial real estate firm. I led security there for almost 3 years. I was the CISO there until summer of 2024, when I joined with my co-founders who had also worked at JLL and TransUnion with me to start Spektion, the company I'm CEO of now.
Nice. And what was the push that made you want to go from being in a company to running your own business?
Well, before I was at TransUnion, I had been on the vendor side. And while I was at TransUnion, I was actually entertaining a number of options to go back there, probably at something smaller, not maybe something I'd start myself. But then, a lot of conversations with my co-founders, ideas we had, just gaps we saw, like as practitioners in terms of what like the cybersecurity product market was offering us vis-a-vis like the challenges we dealt with every day. We thought we had some unique insights. And before the dawn of like Claude Code, I couldn't build a damn thing myself. And they could build anything. But at a high level, it was, I wanted to do three things. And when I joined JLL, I knew I was going to leave and go do something else back on the vendor side, either at a startup or that I started or another one. So I'd kind of already mentally prepared myself, ramped up for it. But at a high level, it was, I wanted a few things kind of out of, like this portion of my career. I wanted to do work that I actually wanted to do.
Yeah.
I can talk more about that, in a minute, but I wanted to do it with the people I wanted to do it with, which were my co-founders and like our early hires. And I wanted to get out of it what I put into it. And like that last part, I was very well compensated, right? Like there's a lot of like, not a lot, but a vocal minority of CISOs who are talking about how tough the job is and all the pressures as if they're the only corporate executives facing that. I mean, that's what the money's for, right? So, right, like, hey, if your job is to be the chief digital janitor and you're paid like seven figures for it, I think that's a pretty good gig. Just shut up and pick up the trash. Nobody wants to hear about how hard it is to scrape gum off the floor. But I wanted to do it with the people I wanted to do it with. And, I would say like at both TransUnion and JLL, I had the good fortune because of like the leadership of both those companies are really building teams, right? I was brought there to build up programs.
Mm-hmm.
And so there was a certain degree of like entrepreneurial culture in terms of what we were doing that, right? We built operations that we thought needed to be built for the problems at hand. We essentially probably created like a micro culture that was sometimes not aligned with the corporate culture and honestly didn't make me a very good executive for having done that lesson learned, right? Especially if it's totally orthogonal to the corporate culture. But also, I just know this about myself where I'm not good at being a support person. And, by that, I mean, I had a career in the military and then as a civilian in the intelligence community and the operations world. And uh, I'm good at being in the role that the organization is about, right? I mean, I think I was mildly effective as a CISO. Your mileage may vary depending on your take, but at the end of the day, like if you're in the Air Force, if I'm in the Air Force, I need to be a pilot, right? If I'm in the Army, I need to be an operator. If I'm in the intelligence community, I need to be an operations officer, right? I'm happiest when I feel like my success directly maps to the organization's mission. And obviously, the easiest way to do that is to start and run your own company.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Was there like a specific moment? I mean, you said that you already knew going into your CISO position that you weren't going to stay forever, but was there a specific moment or frustration that um, pushed you at a certain time to go into your own
Yeah, I
business?
mean, I don't know that I had this like moment of clarity, right? Like an alcoholic hitting rock bottom or anything. There's
Right.
probably a whole series of moments where, like most people, you say, I can't believe that I work for this person or that this is my job, or you think, am I getting dumber by doing this? Um, right. So I don't, it's probably very incremental. I would say the moment was, and it really made it a lot easier because my co-founders were taking the leap with me when we were just talking and we realized we could actually, like, we could do this, right?
Hmm.
Like I said, a lot easier. I didn't just go off on my own. I went off with other people who had as much, if not more, to lose than I did.
Yeah. Yeah, it definitely is tough to do it alone. When I made the decision to do this, I was on my own for a whole month. And
Yeah.
it was intense, but then I was very fortunate that Erin came along with me. So you talked about going back to being part of an organization, a vendor, rather than your own business. Like, what was was it the decision that you guys came up with this great idea that you knew could solve a problem, so it just made it simple, even though the risk of doing your own thing is definitely higher?
Yeah, yeah, it wasn't like I felt like we had this aha moment where like we arrived at, the idea to do exactly what we're doing now. I mean, we thought about just big problems, and probably not germane to most of your audience, but we were just thinking about real gaps in how organizations can identify and manage vulnerabilities
Hmm.
in the software that runs on their systems. But it was when I realized that, my co-founders weren't just the folks I could build this with, but they were the people who, and I'd known like they were already like tireless workers,
Yeah.
not going to be easily demoralized, but also that they could be as flexible as we would need to be because we knew that we had an idea and where we ended up wasn't going to be where we started.
Yeah.
And it was kind of when I did my own mental math and I did my risk model around this, and I realized that they're going to be able to pivot with me, as much as the business requires.
Yeah, no, that's super important. Going back to what you said about, wanting to do work with people that you want to do work with. And when you go into your own business, being super flexible about what you're focused on and when, because it does change. And even though it's a completely different space, we've been through that journey too of what we thought was going to be our focus and where we'd spend most of our time has changed significantly just in the last 6 months. So it's a real interesting journey. I know Erin's got some questions for you, but I just want to reassure people that perhaps were worried that Joe spent the next like 3.5 years bullying me while we were at
Oh.
TransUnion. He did, but I am happy to say that one of my final meetings that I had with Joe, he gave me the very high praise of telling me he didn't hate working with me. And I was like, thank you. It stuck with me forever.
Me as well.
Clear in your memory
Yeah.
these.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think, we've talked a lot about leadership on this podcast and also about what it feels like to become a founder and some of the trade-offs that people don't necessarily warn you about. And so, Joe, I've got some questions for you along that vein. Is there anything to kick us off? Is there anything that you underestimated about becoming a founder? And if so, what were those things?
I probably did, and I just am not introspective enough to realize it when it comes to myself. But what I'll just kind of speak a little more broadly. Here's one of the things I just realized, right? When you're leading like, teams of a couple hundred folks, and versus starting with a smaller team, and I had worked on like small teams
Mm,
in the military, is that you have to be aligned with the employees very quickly. There has to be very good alignment or not at all.
mhm,
And like I'm continuously impressed at like how a lot of our early employees like do amazing things, right? Like you hear phrases in like tech world about 10x engineers and things like that. But I've seen some folks who just go above and beyond it, both in terms of like what they do and like their commitment. But
mhm.
then I've also just seen how with some employees, in a way that you can mitigate in the corporate world, right? Like you can mitigate, employees maybe, having a tough time and still get the most out of them. But it's really binary in the startup world. You are either amazing or you're not a fit.
Mm.
And it may just be you're not a fit, for me and to deal with my BS, right?
No
But
way.
yeah, right. That's kind of a non-negotiable.
Yeah.
But what I really underestimated was the extent to which, again, some people will do amazing things and far exceed your expectations. And for other people, it's just not a good fit.
Yeah.
And you will often recognize it before they do,
Yeah.
right?
Mhm. And
Um,
so, on that topic, is there anything that you would say has changed about how you lead people after becoming a founder?
Yeah, I probably lead people a lot more like I did when I was like earlier in my career, before I was in the private sector, right? In that, like, hey, here's the mission, here's what we have to do. Yeah, there is a lot of like accountability on you.
Mm,
And you have to give people the opportunity to either, crash or like reach the stratosphere very quickly, right? And you have to be willing to call it, right?
mm,
Um, very, very quickly. I think that's important, and honestly, it's the most fair thing to
Yeah.
the right to the employee because you honestly don't have the time to not go through all the administrative hurdles from an HR perspective. that you do. That's not really a big deal, at least it hasn't been for us. It's more about you don't have the time to kind of coach people along. I mean, you need to do everything in your power to make people really successful,
Yeah.
but you have to recognize one, if people are going to succeed or not in the role they're in, and then two, is there a role like because a lot of folks maybe are just in the wrong role, but could be tremendous contributors and where that is. And
Mhm.
if you can't figure it out, they're not going to figure it out without you doing it, and it's just not a fit.
Yeah. And that's such a good point. There's just no time. Where you have um more uh like I hate to use this term, but like more runway for things to get completed and there's more people contributing and you can have like people that are a little bit slower to move or are not able to like fully take ownership of a decision or an action themselves. They want to, talk it through. You can have that in corporate, but when you're in a startup, there's no time for any of that. It's like you have to complete X and you have to figure it out. Like I can't sit with you and figure it out with you because I'm figuring out my own problems.
Yeah, and maybe it's not necessarily fair, which is why I try to be as transparent about it, in the
Yeah.
hiring process, right? Like, hey, there's no way like we could go through a battery of like 4 hours of interviews and practical exercises and things like that, but
Hmm.
that's not really going to determine whether or not you're a fit,
Yeah.
right? So, the first, couple of months on the job is really the actual interview process. And some folks they call it themselves, right? Like they're like, "Hey, I thought it was for me. I'm smart, I'm introspective enough and self-aware enough that I get it. It's not for me right now." And that's great. And sometimes they don't, and in the corporate world, you would a lot of times try to bring them along,
Yeah.
right? You just don't have time to do that. Not because I don't have time, right? I've got enough Adderall in my drawer here beside me. I'll always make time. Right? I mean, I'll just crush it up, roll up a dollar and but
Just a
it's
dollar.
I'll make the time. It's the opportunity cost of what else you could be getting done.
Yeah.
That's what you don't really have. And folks can sense it, right? So and the other team members can sense it because what's incredibly important is when you have a bunch of highly motivated high performers.
Hmm.
Not to say that folks who aren't a fit aren't high performers, they're just maybe not in the context of the role at the company.
Yeah.
But like I worry, other than deal flow, there's nothing I worry about more than the morale of like our best folks,
Yeah.
right? And their well-being. So
Yeah, and
Yeah.
it definitely impacts people. Sorry, Erin, I was just going to say it definitely impacts those around you if, you know, somebody's not quite getting it at the same pace. It's really noticeable in this kind of environment. And yeah, it's everybody needs to be on the same page and pulling the same way. It's tough when it doesn't work out.
and I'm very willing to believe there's oftentimes where like I'm just not the right vessel to communicate what needs to be done and how and in what way. But
Mm.
I'm an army of one, so to speak, when it comes
Yeah.
to some of this stuff. So if I can't figure it out, if I can't figure out how to make somebody successful and they're either extrinsically motivated or they need that support, it's just not going to happen. And
Yeah.
so the fairest thing for everybody is to just call it as soon as possible.
Yeah, totally.
I've got sort of a talent related question just creeping into my mind. And so I'll go off our outline for a moment here. But I feel like Amy and my journey has been a real lesson in some of the behaviors or sort of qualities that make people successful in this type of an environment. And I, for a long time, had held this belief that if you had, a killer work ethic and a positive attitude, you could figure anything out, maybe outside of technology anyway. But is there anything that's changed about your beliefs in terms of critical qualities that you now see as very important or that you now prioritize over other things as you're hiring for your team?
Yeah, I mean, beyond the things you mentioned, right? Great attitude, great work ethic.
Hmm.
Um, I would say like a technical criteria is like there's probably two things. One is just your willingness to like refactor your opinions and learn. That's particularly important
Mm.
when it comes to like, how do you get leverage out of like adopting AI, which every couple of months there's a new equation, right? Like
Yeah.
there's a lot of people early who were, rightfully kind of AI deniers. And you have to be willing to just rethink your stance on that.
Hmm.
That's one. The other is, when you're at a startup, things are going to change, right? Like, hey, we thought we were going to do X. Now we're getting signals we're going to do Y. Some of it's like actual signals from the market, some of it's intuition.
Hmm.
And that creates like some ambiguity. So you have to have employees who have a tolerance for ambiguity.
Yeah.
They're intrinsically motivated by doing a great job because they love what they're doing. But at the same time, they can have comfort with understanding that, hey, things are going to change, right? And what success looks like for the company is going to change, how that translates to what they deliver is going to change, right? They just are intrinsically motivated by doing awesome work. And if the purpose of that work changes, that's fine because that's not really their focus.
Yeah. No, it makes a ton of sense, and everything that you're saying just rings so true. Even though like I said, it's a completely different space, but the work ethic, the attitude, the operating in ambiguity, like I think those are just so um like a thread between all startups that you have to possess those qualities, those behaviors to be able to tolerate the working environment. Some people like really thrive off that, and some people just find it way too complex to unpick and find their way through.
I mean, there's
When
also just the comfort. I'm sorry to cut you off
no,
there,
go
but
on, go on.
another thing is just you just have to have comfort with like a ton of, I don't want to say scrutiny, but just transparency into what you're getting done every day,
Yeah.
Mhm.
right? Where, like, and every day is not going to be a win, right? Or you're
Yeah.
going to do things that, in retrospect, maybe, didn't work out or they're just rendered obsolete by new things.
Mhm.
So you have to be very invested in the work you're doing when you're doing it. You cannot be overly emotionally invested in the work you did.
Yeah.
And you have to be comfortable with being under the microscope, not because you're working for micromanagers, but just because everybody sees everything that everyone's doing.
Yes. Yeah.
Every day is selection. Every day is a selection.
Mhm.
Sounds so that sounds so harsh, but it's so true. And I think as well, it's funny because there was a couple of things that Erin and I kind of went through on this journey. One is that our work ethic, our attitude, our ability to operate in ambiguity is like super strong. What just came to my mind with what you just said was that bit around, when something doesn't work. Um, that was kind of a newer experience because we're used to like going into organizations when things are really broken, making like big impacts, quick changes, getting our pat on the head, and everybody's happy at the end of the day. And it's not like that. Like you say, every day is a new thing, and you're not going to win every day. And so the resilience piece, I think, was big for us, not because we don't like feedback, or we love that. We want to get better, and we want to add a ton of value to everyone that we work with, but the pace of how quickly we were able to make an impact in our sector, in our industry, was just slower than we anticipated. I don't know. I don't want to talk for you, Aaron, but does that kind of like ring true to you?
Yeah, I think, that your definition of success has to change.
Yeah.
And I think it's a lesson that you can really only learn the hard way. But I'd be curious, Joe, for your take on that too.
Yeah, I mean, here I kind of knew this going in because I'd worked with so many startups and had friends that had done them before. And
Mm,
even the most successful ones, well, one, you only hear about them when they reach success, right? And everything, and the narrative ends up being everything was up and to the right.
Hmm.
So there's a huge selection bias in terms of the stories you actually hear about.
true. Yeah.
But also, like I'm highly confident, that you all like, Spection are going to be like very successful.
Mm.
But you just have to understand that like it's not going to feel like it's even at the end when you're successful, the way there is not going to feel like, oh, it was a smooth glide path there, right?
Right.
So uh I had already kind of prepared myself for that, right? And what you don't want to over prepare because then you become too accepting of defeats.
Yeah.
But you have to just be comfortable being unhappy and displeased with outcomes that you heavily invested yourself in trying
Yeah.
to create and just move on, right? It's like shooting free throws. You just have to like worry about the next one.
Yep, so true. And yeah, the first knock, like it hurt. The second one was just like, all right, well, can't afford to be moping around. Gotta get on with it. And now I think we're better for it, like better operators, better humans, just valuing different things, which I think has been a pretty cool change. Um, has there been any moments since you um, moved into uh, your own space that you had any doubts?
I mean, doubts in terms of was this the right thing to do?
Yeah, like doubts that
Not,
you had
I
not had.
mean, I don't have doubts that it was the right thing to do. Because I just think I can get anything done, right? I probably have an unrealistic assessment of my capabilities to just figure it out and get stuff done. So not really. I mean, it's some every once in a while like I don't get too high or too low, right?
Yeah,
And I think sometimes as a boss, it's maybe to the detriment of the team. Like when there's a win, like I don't overly celebrate, right? I mean, I'm happy for what we do. And I like to, call out when we do something very great.
yeah,
But if you get too high, then you're also going to get too low,
yep,
right? So I try to stay pretty modulated on that. Now, I do think, largely driven by AI, everybody needs to think about being disintermediated, right? And hey, the thing that I was thinking where I was going to bring really unique value to the market is now maybe not going to exist or be commoditized or just be
right.
rendered not very valuable. But again, I think if you have probably totally unrealistic expectations of your ability to just figure it out and succeed, you've got a fighting chance, right? And
Yeah.
I heard a saying that sticks with me because not a lot of people probably just who know me would just say, "Oh yeah, he's a real optimist." But here's but this phrase I remember at least once a week, which is, if you want to be right most of the time, be a pessimist. But if you want to be successful, be an optimist.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it's everything you're saying I'm totally in agreement with. I had a call with somebody who I had been like having some sort of like mentor relationship with a few weeks ago, and it was after maybe like the first big knock. And it was just, I was just not in a good frame of mind. And the person said to me, okay, like when's your cutoff date? Actually, they called it a drop dead date. They're like, when's your cutoff date that you're just gonna like give up? And I was like, excuse me? Like that's not even in question. This is gonna work. Like I know it's gonna work. And I was just like, it really shocked me out of my little funk because I was like, no, 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 we're not going down that road. Um, because yeah, I think we've had that belief from day one that we're going to be successful. It's at times obnoxious, the plans that we have for ourselves going down the line, but I think you have to have that like faith in yourself to keep
Um,
going, especially when those knocks come.
yeah, and you know what? This is a huge character flaw, probably, definitely as like a husband, father, and friend. But like when things are really going downhill, like the job will be the last thing to suffer, right? This is probably
Yeah.
just like how I came up, like, and being very mission oriented.
Hmm.
And so far, my son doesn't hate me and my wife hasn't left me. So I haven't gotten any of those signals that things are about to come to a crashing halt yet. After those two things happen, maybe then I'll recalibrate. But so far, so good.
Yes, definitely need supportive family around you to tolerate the working hours.
Oh yeah. I mean, not just the hours, but it's just the disengagement when you're not technically working. Like my wife is
Mm,
the same, and I couldn't do any of this without her. She's doing at least 90% of the parenting and really just everything around the house while having a pretty important job herself. So
that's
yeah,
awesome.
it's a huge component. It makes it a lot easier.
Yeah, 100%. You mentioned earlier about ambiguity, and so I just wonder like how you personally make decisions when you have incomplete information.
I, the answer is I just make a decision,
Yeah.
right? Again, I mean, kind of going back towards I'll figure it out. We'll make a decision. Maybe there's a 45% chance it's wrong. It's just about how fast we recognize it. And the longer we go, I talked to my co-founder and CTO Josh about this. We just iterate much more quickly through failure. And
Mhm.
so part of that's just kind of being deprogrammed from like the corporate world where you just don't have the latitude to do that. And
Yeah.
honestly, sometimes the sense of urgency is not as great,
Yeah.
right? Like because the organizations themselves that you work at don't they're not comfortable with that speed.
Yeah.
So there's always a lot of ambiguity, and you're never going to have enough data points. I just say, okay, one, I have to make a decision as fast as possible so we can iterate through failure. And
Hmm.
then two, like, is this a defensible decision, right? I was on a call today and we were talking about marketing and PR,
Hmm.
and I kind of had a hunch that something was the right thing to do, but I like to, I was talking through it with my marketing leader and just saying, hey, why is this a defensible decision? If this completely fails, like why was this defensible? Like
Hmm.
why was our rationale defensible?
Yeah, I think that is a really great tip, like to ask yourself that question. Um, I know we definitely make decisions quickly. We like live with the mantra that the only bad decision is not making one at all. But yeah, I think that's a good
Okay.
tip for people out there that are thinking about doing something similar is, when you move quick, you have to just make sure that you can talk to why, should you need to.
I think this is like a Bezos Amazon thing, but it's definitely true that very few decisions are one-way doors. I mean, you need to recognize them when they are, right?
Yeah.
Where, hey, we're not going to recover if we make this decision.
Right.
But
But that's very
almost
few.
every decision you're going to make during the day is a two-way door.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, it's good to remember that too. So you've been going for a couple of years now. So what's harder, the early days or now that you're scaling?
Uh, it, I definitely think it's harder in the early days because you're just not exactly sure what to do in terms of where to put your effort. There's a lot of advice you get.
Mm,
There's kind of, when you're starting a software company, what roles you bring on when. It's kind of like a template of what you're expected to do.
mm-hmm.
And again, I think there's a lot of selection bias in terms of you can follow that playbook perfectly and things will still not work out. If it did, every VC would only pick winners, right? If they just
Yeah.
had them execute the playbook.
Yeah.
Um, so, there's a lot of ambiguity and it wasn't like stressful, but just, there's a lot more learning going on, right? Still a ton of learning now,
Mm-hmm.
but the amount of, one, you become more opinionated and confident in just your gut decisions
Yeah.
now it's just a lot more effort and it's like getting people aligned. Like I find the bigger the company gets, the more comfortable I am, not because I'm like insulated from things more or have less to do,
Mm.
but just because you kind of have more resources to play
Yeah.
with, right?
Yeah.
And you can fail faster, get more data points, and like people are so much. I mean, it's one as your company grows and you have more folks. Of course, you have more things you need to get done.
Mm-hmm.
But when you combine that with like the ability to leverage AI smartly, like
Mm-hmm.
it's an incredible productivity boon. And so
Yeah.
now, like something I think about is everybody is always working all the time, right? That's kind of a given.
Hmm.
We have great employees work really hard. But it's also just, is it the optimal use of their time, right? Like, hey, do we have agents running 24/7 doing everything they can be doing for us, right? And if not, you feel like you're leaving money on the table.
Hmm. Yeah. So when you think about this journey, who shouldn't become a founder of a company?
Well, like all the people that don't have the traits, I guess we talked about is a given. But, like I'll tell you, people who are like, I want to be my own boss,
Mm,
right? And maybe in some contexts that's true, but I feel like I work for everybody now,
yeah.
as opposed to in the corporate world where, I just had to make sure my priorities were, totally aligned with my boss's priorities, right?
Yeah.
And a lot of times in the corporate world, when you feel like that isn't the case because maybe there's, kind of competing priorities among like various levels of leadership, right? I've experienced where that could be frustrating. But in general, it's pretty easy. But for folks who think like, oh, I'm just going to be my own boss, there's I had a lot of conversations with folks about where it's like founder as a lifestyle brand,
Mm.
where they're so into being a founder. Um, It's like CrossFit or being a vegan, right? Like we hear about it all the
Very
time.
in vogue right now. Yeah.
And not only is it probably not mapped to the company's success, it's also like unbelievably unfair to your employees, right? Like if
Yeah.
they're joining you and sacrificing a ton, so that again, you can have this lifestyle brand or feel
Yeah.
a certain way, like that's absolutely the wrong person to do it, right? And
Yeah.
I mean, like obviously like multitasking, right? Task switching, that's a given. Um, in terms of your ability to do that. And every founder is going to do something different, but let's just assume, and we're like a venture-backed startup.
Yeah.
There's you've gotta, and most startups don't start with like somebody on go-to-market, right? So if you're the CEO, you're typically go-to-market,
Yeah.
right?
Mhm.
Your founder typically go-to-market. So you've got to have that comfort with talking to people, dealing with, just dealing with rejection of some sort, right?
Mhm.
Negative feedback. Also, like dealing with investors is totally different than dealing with potential customers, right? In terms of how you have to work with them and what they want to hear.
Yeah.
Some of them want to be baffled with bullshit because they're getting bullshitted all the time. So, um, right. And like I said, I am genuinely actually like a pretty optimistic person, but I try to stay pretty grounded in my description of things. Even though like to myself, I see like an amazing path for our company.
Yeah.
Um, but so you have to be willing to have different versions of yourself for different audiences,
Yeah.
for the investor community, for the market, for your team,
Yeah.
right? And so to try to stay like to feel like you're always being genuine, because I don't know very many people that feel very good about themselves when they feel like they're being disingenuine, right?
Yeah.
So
For
maybe if you have like minimal self-awareness, that's not a problem.
sure.
But if you're a relatively introspective person and you still have discomfort with having to be different people depending, different person, at least a different flavor of yourself depending on the audience, that's gonna be tough. Like I'm fortunate where, from like my time in the government, I kind of learned to be whoever the other person needed me to be. But it's
Yeah.
still, you still have to learn how to do that. And if you just want to live your truth and be your authentic self 100% of the time with every audience, you're,
This is not
you're
for
you're probably
you.
gonna have a, right. Yeah, it's probably not for you.
Yeah. Now, I like to think of it more like I'm meeting my audience where they're at rather than like I have some kind of personality disorder, but it could be both. I don't
Well,
know. It could
I
be
like to think of it like I'm three-dimensional.
yeah,
And the part of me you see depends on like
your
you're just
angle.
seeing me from one angle.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's me. You're just not getting 360 Joe.
Yeah. And I guess my last question is, if you had to do it all again, what would you do sooner?
I just would have done it sooner.
Mm,
I just would have started sooner. And no, there were a lot of reasons, right? There was like some economic security that I wanted to make sure I had.
yeah,
Um,
that's
you know,
real.
we wanted to, it's funny, you want to get to a point where you feel like you have such high confidence in the idea you're going to execute on, although you're going to almost always iterate through that idea. And it's,
Mhm.
and 2 years later, you're going to be like, what were we thinking? Um, so I probably just would have done it sooner. Um, and like there's a lot of mistakes. Like I said, it's failing fast and
Mhm.
trying to fail faster. I would have failed faster at almost every failure I had, I would have failed faster at.
Yeah.
Mm. Well, I think we'll wrap our conversation with maybe just one more question. I for one am excited to follow Spection and the continued growth ahead. What would you say, Joe, as you look back over the last couple of years, what are you most proud of building so far within your
Uh,
company?
Honestly, I think we built I think a pretty strong culture. Of course, I'm biased, right? And I could
Mm.
just be delusional on this.
I doubt it.
Um,
Your teams were always so loyal. Like they loved you. So I'm sure it's exactly the same now.
well, I don't know that they would all say that, but I appreciate that. But honestly, I'm really proud of the trust we built with customers because, I
Yeah.
dealt with vendors so much, right?
Mm,
And, I had good relationships with folks there, but I think that our customers really feel that we're focused on them and that, typically that's something you lose at scale and we haven't lost it yet
yeah.
as we work with
Right.
more and more companies. So I'm like really proud of like the trust our customers have in us.
Mm. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And as I think about Joe, your brand and just our conversation today, what comes to mind first is just the sort of direct clarity and matter of fact confidence that you carry in everything that you say. And I think that probably translates to trust built fast and lasting over time with your customer base.
Or at least the facade is holding, Aaron,
Yeah, yeah.
so
Well,
far.
perception is reality. We were talking about that today too. But no, I think to Amy's point, she's watched you for a long time with your teams and with customers, and it holds true. But it has been just a joy to dive into conversation with you. If listeners are interested in following your journey, Joe, or in learning more about you, where can they find out more or follow you?
Probably the best place to follow the company and me is LinkedIn, right?
Hmm.
Joseph Silva, LinkedIn, Spektion with a K. Um, on LinkedIn and obviously, Spection.com, but not nearly as dynamic as probably, our LinkedIn presence for both me and the company.
Okay, perfect. Well, it's been so great to get to pick your brain, Joe. Thank you. Have a fantastic evening, and we're looking forward to following your continued success. Thanks so
Yeah.
much.
Thanks,
Yeah. Thank you
Joe.
for letting me join you both. This was great.
Take care.